Good morning and welcome to the Training the Trainer podcast with Vince Stevenson. Today it's my pleasure to introduce you and interview my friend and colleague Andy Pring. Andy has over 20 years of experience in active dialogue between religions and cultures, promoting shared values and facilitating difficult conversations. His main focus was building bridges between Muslims and non-Muslims. He's a qualified and experienced counter-radicalization professional with particular expertise in Somali, Pakistani and Palestinian communities. He's travelled widely across the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, including living in both urban and rural areas of the West Bank in Palestine and staying with families for 18 months or so while he was conducting field research for his master's degree. Andy recently founded his own company called Writing for Social Change, and he has a great project coming up in August in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. I'm sure Andy will be excited to share more about that later. Andy, welcome. How's your week going?
Good morning, Vince. Yeah, doing well, thank you. Lots going on, so spinning lots of plates I'm trying to spin, but none have smashed so far, so all good.
Okay, well, that sounds good. As we can see, there is no visuals on this particular one. There seems to be a problem with my video and your video. And so we're just going to go with sound, which for some people will be a relief. So, Andy, before we begin, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your formative years, just to get some background information on you. You were born in Kathmandu. Tell us about the story of that occurrence, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, slightly unusual for someone with my background. My parents were both doctors, and they worked for the leprosy mission in India for 2 years, and then Nepal for 1 year. And so I was born in Kathmandu, and I only stayed there as a baby, unfortunately, so I don't have any memories. But I did go back to visit in about 2009 and visited the leprosy hospital where my parents worked, which was a really great experience. And I remember one of the nurses remembered me as a baby, so kind of she came running down the hill to greet me, which was surreal but really really special. And so we moved. My family moved back, and I moved to the UK for the first time when I was about 7 months old. And yeah, so that's how that came about. And then we travelled around the UK a bit before settling in Hertfordshire till I was about 10, and then to Guernsey in the Channel Islands for my kind of secondary school years.
Okay. Now, did you come from a big family? Have you got many brothers and sisters?
I'm the youngest of four, so all my siblings were in India and Nepal as kind of toddlers, so they have memories of that. But yeah, so I've got two older sisters and a brother who's next in age to me, and then myself.
Okay, thank you. Now, your parents, doctors, I'm sure they had a big influence on you. What about your schoolwork choices and your professional life? Did they give you direction or motivation or inspiration, maybe?
Mm. I think most of my family's medical in one way or another, and so I'm kind of the black sheep of the family in that sense. I didn't go anything into medicine. I'm actually very squeamish, so I don't like to go anywhere near blood or anything like that. So um, I don't quite know how that happened, but I think the way that I think my mum had the greatest influence on me. I think I grew up in a Methodist family, Christian family. My mum was a very strong Christian, and she kind of instilled that in all of us. And although I'm not a practicing or believing Christian anymore, that was a very formative part of my life, church, and kind of learning about Jesus's life. And I think my mum was always someone to kind of reach out to, what you might be called the outcasts. In that kind of biblical language, people who were cast out by mainstream society. So even though we lived in very white middle class kind of societies in Hertfordshire and in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, my mum always still somehow managed to find people who were kind of outcast, and so form former drug addicts or just people who kind of didn't fit the mold of the norm, and who were kind of ostracized by people. My mum would always kind of befriend them, and she always kind of gravitated towards people who had some kind of mental health challenges or some kind of social challenge. And she kind of instilled in me and my siblings, this reaching out to people who are less fortunate than yourselves. And I think that probably in hindsight that's something that really stuck with me. And so going to Sunday school and church and getting involved in the church youth groups, I think the part of Christianity that always appealed to me was trying to stand up for justice and standing up for those people who are less fortunate than you, but who are marginalized in whatever way it might be.
Okay, thank you. So, when did you first get this interest in the Middle East, and what kind of created that intention for you to travel and to study there?
Hmm. I think I've thought about this quite a lot, because it's in some ways it's quite hard to know where it came from. But I think there's probably a couple of points that I've been able to identify. And one of the earliest ones was doing my GCSEs when I was about 15. Did religious education as a GCSE option, and Judaism was the focus of that. And as part of that, we learned about the Middle East and about the kind of conflict there. Just kind of briefly touched on that, and we and there was some study of the Holocaust, and just obviously found the learning about the Holocaust really upsetting, and then learning about present day situation in Jerusalem, and I just remember it being described as a community in conflict. And I don't know why, but that just resonated with me. And so I just remember that being a very early kind of indication, like it's something that just kind of pricked my interest. And then when I did religious education at A level, we were able to travel out to Jerusalem as part of that, and that was my first time going to the Middle East. And I remember being in the Dome of the Rock, and overhearing somebody talking about that this was where the Prophet Muhammad had his night journey, and he from the rock in the Dome of the Rock, that's where he ascended into heaven in his night journey. And I didn't know anything about Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, but I was just intrigued that they had this belief that he'd ascended into heaven, from somewhere, from the same city where Christians believe that Jesus ascended into heaven. And I understand now that it's quite a different context, but it just really, like I say, piqued my interest. And that was coupled with the same trip when we went on a camel trek through the Sinai desert, and our Bedouin guides roll out their prayer mats and pray. And I was just absolutely intrigued by it. There was this entire religion and belief in God that I had no idea about, and I just really wanted to know more. So I think those things were kind of what laid the foundation, I think.
Okay, thank you. I've worked in the Middle East a number of times on various projects, and I agree with you. It's an absolutely fascinating place. The culture, the language, the landscape is remarkably beautiful, and yes, it's for me. I had a bit of a culture shock. What about you?
But yeah, I think culture shock. I would probably more, just for my experience, I think I'd describe it more as just an awakening. Um, Really opened my eyes to just what an entirely different world it is out there from my own experience growing up, like say in these kind of very white middle class neighborhoods in middle England. It was just entirely eye-opening, and that school trip that I went on was 1999, and then I did go back subsequently to Iraq and Lebanon while I was at university, and then eventually, as we'll talk about later, went back in 2005. But I would describe it all as an awakening, a shock. Sometimes there were shocks along the way, witnessing certain things, um, but yeah, I think for me more of an awakening. That's probably how I describe it best.
Okay, thank you. So shocks along the way, but that's still you maintained that interest, and you went there and you studied for your master's degree in Islamic studies, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So this was after my degree in theology, and it's probably worth mentioning that the start of my theology degree at Birmingham University coincided with 9/11, the attacks in the US, and just by complete coincidence, that also coincided with the Islamic Studies department at Birmingham University merging with the theology department. So it meant that in this environment, of this post 9/11 environment of awful Islamophobia, uh, that I was, as a theology student, I was suddenly able to take modules from the Islamic Studies department, which had previously not been possible. So, for some reason, I thought that everybody would be taking the opportunity to sign up and learn as much as possible about Islam. But bizarrely, I was probably the only one in many of the classes, and so I was. I took classes in tafsir of the Quran, which is hermeneutics of the Quran, and in Islamic philosophy and a history of Islamic thought. And for all of those ones, I was the only non-Muslim in the class. And so it was taught by Muslims for Muslims, and so it was a real privilege for me to be in that environment. And I got on very well with my Muslim fellow students, and the professor who taught tafsir of the Quran, her and I set up a Christian Muslim dialogue group as our kind of way of responding to the tension that was kind of palpable on campus at that time between Muslims and non-Muslims, and in the wider society in Birmingham as it was across the country. So that had a huge influence on the direction that I went, and then so following that degree in theology with a lot of Islamic studies, I ended up going to the Middle East, to Jerusalem, initially to volunteer for a Palestinian charity called Sabil, which is a Christian Palestinian Liberation Theology Center. I volunteered there for a few months in 2005, but realized that I wanted to kind of get stuck more into the wider Palestinian kind of landscape beyond just Jerusalem. And so I came back to the UK, and I was chatting to that tafsir professor, and she convinced me to do a PhD, which was complete anathema to me at the time, because I didn't then, and I still don't now consider myself an academic. I feel completely out of my depth with academia. But she got me a couple of coffees and managed to persuade me to start this PhD process. So that's what I went out to the Middle East to do, was to do the research for what was intended to be a PhD.
So intended to. So what happened? How did that turn out?
Yeah. So the subject of my PhD thesis was to use the Israel-Palestine conflict as a case study, a microcosm of the war on terror, which was at its height around that time. You know, we had the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and you still at that time, it was Bush and Blair were in power, and I was just convinced that the war on terror was really, really counterproductive, and based on a lot of misconceptions. And so what I wanted to do was to use the Palestinian militant groups as a kind of case study, to analyze to what extent the Palestinian militant groups were inspired purely by this religious hatred of the West, as opposed to just coming out of a context, a socio-economic context of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So I had a strategy, which was kind of a 4-year strategy. Part of my condition of agreeing to do the PhD was that it would be based entirely on field research rather than being stuck in a library in Birmingham. And so I had a 4-year strategy that I would spend the first year getting to know the situation in as much of the West Bank as possible and in Gaza, and learn the language, and just kind of live in as many different communities as I could. So I lived for a month or more in Ramallah, and then in a village in the South Hebron Hills, in a village outside Bethlehem, and then ended up in Jenin in the north of the West Bank, and travelled to lots of other cities as well. And then the second year of my strategy was that was when I would really start to knuckle down and do the research with the militant groups. But unfortunately, I managed to start some interviews. I interviewed Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and Islamic Jihad a number of times, but unfortunately, this was around the summer of 2006 when a war broke out between Hezbollah and Israel, and so with the increased security, I ended up getting arrested by the Israelis, and was effectively kicked out. So I then had to come back to the UK, unable to get back to Palestine to complete the research, and so I had to reduce what research I had managed to get. I had to reduce that down to an MPhil, which I did then complete.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that you couldn't complete those studies, but I'm not surprised, to be honest. So, moving on, you're back in England. May I ask you when you got married? Because you have a I think a son, and I think you're a stay-at-home dad for a while. So, was that a time of reflection for you, or was that a time of frustration?
Interesting. I got married in 2008, and yeah, it was. I think when I came back to the UK, my heart still felt in the Middle East, and I wasn't able to go to Israel, Palestine. So I was thinking of relocating to Syria, but yeah, then you kind of fall in love, and it just didn't seem a viable option. And so yeah, so then I at that point I was working in Prevent, which is the UK's counter radicalisation program, and so I kind of ended up finding a job that suited my interests. And I did that for about 8 years in South London, and yeah, then my daughter was born in 2013, and when she was nearly 2 years old, I decided to become a stay-at-home dad, for various reasons. My wife had career opportunities which far exceeded my financial earning capabilities, and so it just made sense that we were trying to juggle the childcare between us both working, and it just wasn't feasible. I mean, it was just really hard work, as any parent will know, and it just seemed to make sense for us at the time that one of us should just focus on home life, and because of the financial disparity between our earning potential, it made sense for me to be the one to stay at home, but also it wasn't altruistic. I had vested interests, such as that I was writing a novel, and I was finding it difficult to find the time to write the novel. So by being a stay-at-home dad, that the intention was that would give me more time to write the novel. But my daughter, we found out as she got older, is autistic, and that meant that she was diagnosed when she was 7, but it meant that those years, the kind of the first 5 years of me being a stay-at-home dad were just taken up entirely by looking after her. And then my son was born in 2018. And actually, I didn't experience it as a frustrating period. It was, being a dad is something that I'd always kind of wanted to be and wanted to throw myself into more than my career. And so I was happy with the decision that I'd made. As they then got older, and I wanted to kind of step back into professional life, that was when I was fortunate enough to be able to set up the Creative Writing for Social Change. So it's something that I can do from home, as it's all online, and it gives me that bit of flexibility, but still it's completely focused on the things that I'm passionate about.
Okay. Now, amongst all of your projects, now again, you mentioned your daughter there and having autism. Did that involve lots of time where she couldn't be at school, or doctor's appointments or hospital appointments, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was mostly not her not being able to be in education. It was just very disruptive without going into great depth with it. There was long periods of time when she wasn't able to be at school, or and before that at preschool, and it involved, and when she was at school or preschool, it involved me having lots of long meetings with members of staff, and just having to be on hand at short notice to go and manage whatever was going on that particular day.
Okay. You're very calm about that. I think that I would have found that incredibly frustrating. Now, I have a daughter, and when she was young, I mean, my wife kind of gave up work, and she sort of did the parenting full time whilst I was away at work, and that involved me in those days in my IT career being away for long periods, and I found that very frustrating. I think my wife found it frustrating. I really missed my family. But for you, you sound very calm about the fact that you spent all that. I wouldn't call it. It didn't sound like quality time to me, but you at least you had that presence of your daughter for that time. So I'm sure that was a beautiful time that you can look back on, and hopefully in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a moment ago about founding your company, Creative Writing for Social Change. Could you tell us about the company's ethos and what led you to initially decide to go it alone?
Yeah, sure. Well, the project is teaching creative writing to social activists all around the world, and we get small groups of people, between 4 and 6 people in a group, and we upskill them with creative writing techniques, but also there's a really, really strong focus on dialogue within the group, learning about one another as individuals. They come from such diverse backgrounds, but the intention is that we don't address it from a kind of nebulous cultural position. We ground it in each individual's lived experience, and them as an individual human being with their own stories, their own personalities, and it comes out of this experience that I've had since that kind of post 9/11 situation at university, where there was so much animosity and distrust of people who are different from you. And then the what I learned from sitting down in a small group of people at that point who were Christian and Muslim, just learning about, and just kind of the empathy and the trust that was created just by putting yourself out there and making yourself vulnerable to people who were different to you and who society tells you are your enemy, in inverted commas. Which again goes back to, part of my Christian upbringing was, love your enemy. That was something that my mum very much instilled in me, and I think that's partly what influenced me to create the Christian Muslim dialogue group, was to recognize who it is that you're being told is your enemy, and just to kind of sit down with them and speak directly to them and learn from them. And so and that's kind of what's kind of been my compass really throughout the whole, nearly 25 years now. And so creative writing for social change, it brings that together. But I just love it that I can, because I do it online, it's just a completely global experience, and it's no longer just Christian and Muslim. It's Muslim and Hindu. It's atheist and Buddhist. It's a woman in Afghanistan and a woman in California. It's a refugee in Uganda and a youth worker in Romania. It's just the diversity of participation is just incredible, and the conversations that flow out of that, and the group dynamics that grow it's just such a privilege to be part of it.
It sounds great. I'm just thinking, when you first started the project, what were you hoping for, and what has it turned into, which has surprised you?
Mm. Yeah, interesting. I think my hope, it evolved in my mind over many years, and I think my greatest hope for it would just be that I would be able to run, maybe one group at a time, and I might possibly make a small amount of money out of it. I didn't expect it to be my main income. I just didn't think that it would be significant enough. I also didn't know whether to run it in person or online, especially before the pandemic. My assumption was that it would have to be in person, and I think that's partly why I just thought it would be a side hustle to whatever else I would be doing to earn money. And even after the pandemic, when so much was online, I still wasn't sure whether to run it in person or online, and eventually just kind of decided to run it online. And that's something, I mean, it was clearly the right decision in hindsight, because the response that it received as soon as I launched it in September 2024 just far exceeded my greatest expectations for it. Just the enthusiasm with which people responded to it when they heard about it, and it just really seemed to have struck a chord with people all around the world. People who reasonably senior in organisations like and different governments, to, like I say, women in Afghanistan and refugees in Uganda. It just seems to have struck a chord across that spectrum. So it means that I've had a far greater level of interest and applications than I anticipated. I'm able to run a lot more groups than I anticipated. And then aside from that, we have now several offshoots, which I had no forethought about, but these are kind of ideas that have come out from collaborations with and discussions with other people. So the end of last year, we launched Journalism for Social Change, which is run by an Indian journalist, and we have just launched visual storytelling for social change, which is kind of the brainchild of one of my former colleagues when I worked in Prevent, but also which was I was involved with interfaith work back then. And this is a Jewish colleague of mine who I met in 2008 and worked with, and her and I have just collaborated recently to do this visual storytelling for social change, which she's leading on. And we have plans for screenwriting for social change, which is a collaboration with an Egyptian colleague, which we'll be launching later this spring. And then later in the year, we'll be doing poetry and songwriting for social change. And the retreat that you mentioned, which will be running in late summer. All these kind of ideas have come out because of I feel like I've been able to build up the momentum, and I'm able to tap into this kind of this huge pool of people that just seem to be really resonating with what I'm trying to do, and so it's meant that I'm able to do far more than I anticipated.
Okay. Now, Andy, you just mentioned the retreat again. So, would you like to tell everybody what exactly it entails and how they could apply for that, maybe?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yes, so this is our first retreat. It's not a creative writing retreat per se, but it is very much about sharing stories. It's going to be in Morocco from the 31st of August until the 6th of September. Um, Beginning in Marrakesh, where we'll stay in a riad in the old city, and visit the observatory, which not many people know about in Marrakesh, but be an amazing opportunity to do some stargazing and kind of just reflect on our position in the universe. And then we're going to travel into the High Atlas Mountains and stay at a Casbah, very picturesque Casbah there, and then we'll have a 2-day trek up the highest mountain in North Africa, and then come back down and have a wonderful celebration dinner in the Casbah on our final evening before returning to Marrakesh. And it's going to be a relatively small group, just 12 people, trying to keep it intimate, so that people have an opportunity to share their stories, and make it as diverse as possible. People from all around the world, who are just passionate about social change. The part of the kind of motivation for this is that in my groups, the creative writing is almost a byproduct of the dialogue and the conversation that happens within the groups. And I've learned that is really where so much of the magic happens. And so being able to do that in person over 6 days, in beautiful surroundings, and really quite strenuous climb up this mountain, but I feel like there's something really beautiful about mountaintops, and particularly when it's shared experience. So yeah, and it's just something that I'm hoping will grow year on year, and we will branch out into other parts of the world. We will probably have our second destination will probably be Ethiopia, which we will be looking into subsequently. But yes, this year, all the information can be found on the website, creativewritingforsocialchange.com. And yeah, just take a look there, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, if you could, well, I think I've got a link anyway. I can add that to the podcast thing in YouTube, so should be okay. Or I can add it to the website as well. So fingers crossed for that. So tell us a little bit about the profile of the people, because when I saw it the first time, you're looking for some specific types of people to make it quite diverse, I think.
Mm. Yeah, so with part of the ethos of creative writing for social change is to try and find a balance between people in the inverted commas global north and global south, or global majority. It's what's been reinforced to me even since starting the project is how much the imbalance of this kind of global playing field Everything's online, and it's just so evident that certain people, it's so much more difficult for them to engage in online opportunities, not just because of the cost, but because of the internet connectivity. But we don't let that put us off. We just redouble our efforts to try and make it as accessible as possible in terms of the cost, but also in terms of how we manage internet connectivity. And so we're trying to bring that same ethos into this retreat. So trying to find a balance between people who are from the global north, and those from the global majority. So trying to find 6 from each. And our aspiration is to provide as much of a subsidy as required to make it financially accessible for those coming from the global majority. And the reason we're having it in Morocco as opposed to Europe or the USA is because of the huge difficulties people have in accessing visas for Europe and the US. So that's another decision in trying to facilitate that global diversity. And within that group of 12, we're also trying to make sure that we have a woman, an Afghan woman, because we've done a lot of work with women in Afghanistan, and sadly it won't be possible for people who are living in Afghanistan to be there because of visa and travel issues. But we've worked with a lot of Afghan women who are living in other countries as refugees, and we're hoping that to make sure that they're represented, because their voice is just so critical at the moment with what's going on in Afghanistan. And exactly the same for Gaza. We've had a large number of participants from Gaza join our groups, and that's just become really evident how important that their voice is to be heard at the moment. And so we're trying to facilitate that there'll be at least one person from Gaza present. And then a really important issue for me is about making sure there's a Jewish voice. As I say, I've started studying Judaism at GCSE, and something that and from my understanding of and my study of the Holocaust from that young age has been very formative, and it's instilled in me a real kind of absolute disdain for anti-Semitism, any kind of really genuine deep-seated prejudice towards Jewish people. I just find absolutely abhorrent. And I just really want to make every effort I possibly can to make sure that the Jewish voice is heard, because I've got so many close Jewish friends and colleagues, and for me that is a really, really important factor. So all those, we're hoping this is, it's aspirational because we can't force people to apply. So I'm just really hoping that we will get people from all those backgrounds who'll be willing and able to participate.
Great. Well, I wish you every continuing success with finding the right people. As you explained there, it's very difficult for people to travel from certain countries, so it's not going to be easy. But I hope everything works out for you there. If we can just step back a bit to the mountain climb in Morocco, could you tell us how high that mountain is, ish? And are there any age restrictions for older people like myself?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't know off the top of my hand the actual height, but it's a walk. I think the organisers who I'm collaborating with in Morocco have said that it's up to each individual to make their own choice based on their own health and ability. There isn't a age restriction. And it really is down to each individual to make their own judgments. We have a whole bump of information to kind of give people as much so they can make an informed choice. It's something that people of all ages are capable of doing. It is arduous even for whatever age you are. People with health issues such as asthma and things like that will need to take particular consideration. But the group that we're collaborating with in Morocco are very well experienced and are able to provide loads of support and guidance and advice. So welcome any kind of questions or queries, concerns from people, and we'd be more than happy to talk them over.
Okay. Andy, I think that is a really bold enterprise that you're engaging in. So can I wish you every success with that? Because on that high point of the Atlas Mountains, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being with us today. Please stay on the line for 2 minutes so I can thank you personally. And I just want to introduce our next guest that's coming up in a few weeks. So our next guest is another friend and colleague of mine, Yumi Sykes. Yumi left her corporate role last year and is now a full-time coach. She's also a young mother. So we'll discuss the trade-off between professional success and personal fulfillment. I'll be interviewing Yumi on Wednesday, February 11th at 10 a.m. Thank you for being with us, and goodbye for now.